Good morning. Everybody out there? Okay. Briefly, as Bob mentioned, my background is as a newsman. I do not consider myself a UFO researcher per se, although over the years I have done UFO research. I don't consider myself firmly committed to any particular viewpoint on this whole thing. I've been studying this phenomenon since the 50s, and in fact, I just recently stumbled across in some of my stashed away stuff a drawing I did based on the descriptions in the news media of a cigar-shaped UFO that landed near Levelland, Texas, back about 1957. It was way back there. So I've really been keeping up with this. But like most of you, I simply want to know what's going on. And, Carol, would you hand me that folder? Thank you. Always be prepared. And I'm here to assure you there is a face on Mars. It's stood me in good stead for a long time. Nobody may want to look at it, but it is there. But that brings up what I'm here and I'm going to talk to you about today. Sometimes we lose sight of the forest because we're too busy looking at the trees. And I think what I can bring to this is kind of an overview. The speaker last night was talking about we need an overview. We need some generalists, and that's kind of what I am. I am what I consider the last of a dying breed, which is a generalist. I know a little bit about a whole lot of things, and I don't claim to be an absolute expert in much of anything. But we need to look and see what the pattern is and what's really going on. But I can tell you one thing. This is really exciting times. Isn't this great? I mean, what other period of history in the world could you live in and have anything more exciting and as far as we know, not real dangerous? There's been lots of exciting times in history, but unfortunately most of those were dangerous times too. But today we're in a period of time to where it's not physical growth, it's not physical exploration. I think we're in a period of time here of intellectual and, yes, even spiritual growth and exploration. And it's really, really, really exciting. One of the things that I find very intriguing is, like, I've been to, the last 3 or 4 months, I've been to just one UFO conference after another. And one of the things I've noticed is that the graying of the audience, and I'm a fine one to talk. We all tend to be older folks, okay? What about the young kids? What about the high schoolers and the teenagers and stuff? Do they not care about all this? Well, let me tell you what I've believed based on my experience, and I have two teenage daughters, okay? Yeah, they care. They also know. They just know. We're here trying to figure it out and trying to learn intellectually for ourselves what's really going on, and they just know. They know. Why do you think you see on TV aliens driving Volkswagens? Why do you see little aliens here and there? They wear T-shirts with aliens on them. Is that just a fad? Well, yeah, it's been co-opted but then that's a human thing too. Anytime you get more than 2 people gathered together, there's somebody shows up to sell T-shirts, right? So that's a very natural thing, but yet there's an underlying gnosis, okay? They just know. They just know. But we don't know because we're just always bamboozled. First, we have Dr. Tom Van Flandern, who holds a doctorate in astronomy from Yale University, and until 1991, he was chief of the Celestial Mechanics branch of the U.S. Naval Observatory. This guy carries some weight. This guy is somebody credentialed. This is somebody I would consider as a journalist a very credible news source. And what does he say? Back in January, he addressed the 191st annual meeting of the United States Astronomical Society, not exactly your most radical group, okay? And he tells them that for 3 years he has been studying the face on Mars. and that he has come to the conclusion that it is not an optical illusion and it is not a natural formation. Now, doesn't that sound just like a scientist? He'll tell you what he thinks it's not, but he doesn't really lay it out as to what he thinks it is. But I also want to share with you what he told the standing room audience at this meeting, because this is where we are. I suggest that in view of these test results, we prepare ourselves for a cultural shock unrivaled in recent times. Whoa, isn't that exciting? Whoa, cultural shock unrivaled in recent times. Okay, so they finally get around, and of course you all have, I'm sure, seen the photograph of the things on Mars. You've got the face. You've got the face. You've got what appears to be pyramid structures over here. You've got a very odd-looking roundish lump here with a very odd thing here, a few craters. I mean, this is some really fascinating stuff, and this was taken, 10 years ago or more? Okay? And today, and unfortunately all I have is the little thing they show the paper, but today we get this little whitish piece of nothing. And they say, oh, well, we've got a better shot now. And there's nothing there. Where's the pyramids? Where's all these structures? Where is this? And is our optical equipment today worse than it was 10 years ago? I don't know. I don't claim to be an expert. And I'm sure this will cycle around and they'll argue about this forever and ever. But all I can tell you is just an old Texas boy looks at it and says, something stinks in Denmark. Because they just don't, there's no comparison. Now, all I can do is use my deductive reasoning, and I have to figure that, it's one of three things. Either the first photo we were shown that clearly seems to indicate that there's some sort of a face-like structure on Mars is somehow bogus. And the picture that they're showing us now, where there seems to be just a desert floor, that must be legitimate, Or maybe the first photograph was legitimate, and the one they're showing us now is somehow bogus. Or the third alternative is, what if both photographs are legitimate and are truthful in what they depict? This means perhaps that somebody's been doing some bulldozer work up on the surface of Mars. I don't know. But isn't this exciting? I mean, look at what we've got going here. Another reason I wonder, Gulf Breeze, they invited me to Gulf Breeze, and I went down to Gulf Breeze, and I'm going, my God, why are they asking me to come to Gulf Breeze? I said, I freely admit, as far as I know, I've never seen a UFO. And as far as I know, everybody in Gulf Breeze has seen a UFO. So what are they asking me down there for? Well, I tell you what I think it is, and I think maybe that's what I'm here today for. To provide a little bit of validity, okay? You always want to hear from the experts. You always want to hear from the guy that's from out of town who comes and tells you what you knew to begin with, right? but it validates, what you think. So I'm here to tell y'all, you're not nuts. There really are UFOs. They really exist. And all this stuff is really going on. Okay? There. Now that I've validated for you, let's get on to other things. You're not alone. One of the latest polls that was done by the Marist Institute for Public Opinion, this was right back at the first of the year, shows that something like trying to get these numbers straight here. 60% of the people they polled said yes, they believe there's intelligent life off planet, off the Earth. What is really interesting but not surprising is that people 18 through age 60 supported the idea of life on other planets, but people older than 60 years old rejected the idea by 67% to 33%, almost the opposite of what everybody else showed. So this shows that we are in a generational shift. And by the way, I would compliment everybody in this office. I don't want to point fingers, especially at myself, but obviously a bunch of us are pushing 60 or will never see 60 again. And the fact that you're here and the fact that you have your mind open and the fact that you are searching for answers, well, my hat is off to you, okay? Because this is some really exciting times that we're going through, and it's going to take everybody pulling together and everybody looking to see what's going on. I'm not going to bother you with this, but I've got a story here out of New Mexico. Ranchers mystified by cattle mutilations. Well, there's a surprising headline, isn't it? Oh boy! But this was from April the 6th, 1998. Okay, and I happen to know that having been up in the Denver area, that they've been having some up there too. So we got cattle mutilations. They're still going on. Still going on. Boy, those devil worshipers just never give up. You know, they just. Of course, you know, it's been going on for 20 years now. Nobody's ever been caught. So, boy, they're slick, aren't they? They're really good. Folks, what we're talking about here, of course, then you got the crop circles. And and I noticed yesterday when I came in, there was a whole bunch of crop circles photographs pasted on the wall up there, and apparently a lot of those are from the 1997 round of crop circles, and they are more elaborate, more intricate, more intriguing than ever before. And Dave Charlie died. You know, he's not even around. So now you got Doug out there with his stick and his string, you know. But you know what, really, there's an example there of one of the worst problems we have is the non-existent news media. There is no news media, I'm here to tell you right now. All we have in this country today is what I call corporate advertising delivery systems. And if you happen to get a little news in there, hey, so much the better for you. But here's what I'm talking about. When the Doug and Dave story came out here back in the early 90s, and it got on the Associated Press and went to every major newspaper in this country. I'm sure every one of you saw at least one story that said, oh, the crop circles have been explained. It was Doug and Dave, these two pub crawlers, and they'd go have a few pints, and then they'd go out in the field with a rope and a board, and they create these crop circles. And that went everywhere. And even Carl Sagan used that story at great detail in a edition of Parade magazine, which comes out and goes to just probably almost every household in this country every Sunday. Okay? And did any of those people stop to consider the numbers? Doug and Dave admitted to creating about 200 crop circles. And yet the year that they admitted to doing this, there were more than 2,000 crop circles reported. And not just in England, but in Australia, in Canada, in other parts of Europe, and in the United States. Boy, they really got around, didn't they? This is an example, though, of where nobody's using their head. Certainly not the media. The media just obligingly reports what the official word is, and with no hint of criticism and no hint of suspicion or no checking of the facts. How could two guys who claim to have created 200 crop circles actually have created 2,000 in all these different countries all around the world? It can't happen. And yet that doesn't get reported. And this is the problem. And I'll tell you where the real problem is. If you want to know, it's with us. Okay? We have found the problem, and it is us. I bet none of you have really thought about this. Everybody talks about the government secrecy, and Lord knows there is government secrecy. They're really keeping all kinds of things from us. But why is that? And is that necessarily bad? How many of y'all have thought that we all know that we have a government of the people, by the people, for the people? Okay? Now, Now, we want that government to respond to us and tell us the truth. But let's face it, folks, we are in the minority. The majority of people out there, they don't want to hear about this. They don't want to hear about it. And the government has responsibility to them, too. This is why last summer we were treated to the spectacle of the Pentagon holding a formal news conference and changing its story about Roswell for the fourth time and saying, oh, yes, well, we threw crash dummies out over the desert. It's like I told CNN at the time, the only dummies in that story is anybody to buy into that thin story. Even Sam Donaldson on national television looked the lieutenant who wrote that report up in the eye and said, do you really expect us to believe that? And if you want the honest-to-God journalistic truth, it came from Colonel Haynes himself at that press conference. During the question and answer with the media, one of the media people actually asked an intelligent question and said, Colonel Haynes said, you're saying that this is what happened, you know, at Roswell in 47, and yet the documentation you're showing us is obviously from the late 50s and from the 60s. You know, how do you explain that discrepancy? And I will quote to you verbatim what Haynes said. He said, well, I really don't know what they saw in 1947. Case closed, right? That's what that was all about. Obfuscation. But what they're doing there is they're trying to play both ends against the middle. When they tell you that it was crash dummies in the desert of New Mexico, most everybody sitting in this audience knows that that is pure D, grade A, number one bourgeois, okay? It just didn't happen. Well, then what? Whoa, wait a minute. That means it must be true. So in a way, in a backhanded way, they were admitting that it was true by offering such an outrageous explanation. And yet, they are also playing to those people who cannot and will not come to grips with the reality of this issue. And those folks can now go to bed at night and sleep peacefully and say, well, the government said it was crash dummies. Just like they can now look at that bad picture reproduced in the newspapers and say, well, see, dear, there was no face on Mars. Pass the post toasties. But there is a reason for that. And you know what? I read something just very recently that just really blew me away because I think it gives us insight into what's going on here, because what is going on, obviously, is a struggle of mindsets, worldviews. That word I hate to use because it's so overused. Paradigms, okay? Worldviews. I read a story about Magellan. When Magellan was going around the world on his explorations, he sailed his galleons into a bay down at Terra del Fuego, which is down on the tip of South America. And when they came in there, they noticed a big native village there, and so they waited, you know, for the natives to come down and jump up and down and scream and holler and point and say, well, look at that, and I like that, and it didn't happen. So they thought, So they get in the boats, and they rowed ashore, and they make their way up into the native village, and here's all the villagers, but they're just going about their daily routines. So they finally found some head guy. I forget if it was a chief or a shaman or something. And after they were able to communicate with him in some fashion, they said, you know, what's going on? Here we show up. We've never seen you folks before. We know you've never seen us before. How come nobody seems to be paying any attention to us? And they were told, you are so far outside our normal world experience that we don't accept you. You don't exist. Think about that. Think about that. How many UFO sightings have we had where there were multiple witnesses and half of them say, oh, yeah, it's a big, long-shaped, cigar-shaped object. And other witnesses say, I didn't see anything. You've got those on the record. A good friend of mine told me a story about how in college he and a friend of his were driving down the road late one night and saw this bright object in the sky. And it was zigzagging all over the place, shooting back and forth, went straight up, disappeared, obviously outside the purview of any kind of conventional flying craft. And my friend says, "Wow, did you see that?" His friend said, "Shut up." Really got mad at him. He says, "Don't ever mention that again. That didn't happen." And you know what? To this very day, I'm sure that guy, it didn't happen. If you ask him about it, he said it didn't happen. It's mindset. It's mindset. What is your mindset? Here's another classic example of mindset. Back in the 50s, there's a military flight full of officers flying along, and a big orangish cylinder-shaped UFO flies up alongside of them, buzzes over to the left wing, buzzes back to the right wing, circles the craft a few times, shoots straight up and disappears. Airplane lands, and of course, obviously, they're debriefed right away. Well, one of these officers happened to be a military psychologist, so they're particularly interested in him. "Did you see the UFO?" he's asked. And the military psychologist replied, "Yes, but I looked away because I don't believe in those things." Now that's mindset. But that's where we are. And that's why in my book, Alien Agenda, I say this is really a book more about mindset than it is about UFOs. And this is what we have to get over. I can assure you that if the vast majority of the people in this country knew as much as you folks know and demanded to be told the truth, they would be told the truth. Okay? So your job is to get out there and shake up your friends and or relatives and neighbors and make them aware of what's going on and let them know that they are interesting times and we need to know what's really going on. Now, at the risk of appearing to make just a really overt and obvious commercial plug for my book, I would like to urge each and every one of you to read Alien Agenda. You're going to find in there some information that I guarantee you didn't know about. You're going to see references to old UFO stories, the Maury Island controversy, the Kenneth Arnold sighting, the Thomas Mantell death. Okay, A lot of what you think you know, but I think you'll find some stuff that you didn't know. Plus, it puts it into a capsulized form where you can really have it, all that information under one cover. For example, all these years that we were looking to Project Blue Book to tell us what was going on with the government's investigation of UFOs, we now know they weren't doing anything except hiding stuff away. And the really good reports went on past Blue Book into higher echelons. What higher echelons? Well, we now know, because there are the documents available, that beginning in 1952 with the Robertson panel, that the whole issue of UFOs left the Air Force and went under the CIA, and now has moved into even higher echelons. In fact, in my book, Alien Agenda, I present a flow chart of the UFO organization, of how it works. Okay, so I think you'll really find stuff there. The main reason, though, is that, okay, most of you have probably read 50, 100 books or so about UFOs. You may have all that basic information. Alien Agenda is the book that you want to give to your father-in-law, who says, "Do you really believe in those things?" Okay? You say, "Here, read this." I don't see how any reasonable, open-minded person could read Alien Agenda from cover to cover and still, with a straight face, say, "Well, there's nothing going on. It's just too much. It's just there. It's just there." It's just like Roswell. You know, Roswell, when I tried to deal with Roswell in my book, you know, what a controversy. There have been books and books and books written about Roswell. You've got government pronouncements. You've got government studies. You got all this stuff that fogs the issue. But what does Roswell come down to? It comes down to mindset. On the one hand, if you choose to, you can believe the government, which has changed its story 4 times and has literally nothing to back up its pronouncements. First they say it's a flying disc, then they say it's a weather balloon. And, well, it's not really a weather balloon, it's a Project Mogul balloon, you know, to test the upper atmosphere to see if the Soviets are secretly setting off nuclear tests. From New Mexico? I happen to have a friend that worked in the NSA years ago. I asked him about Mogul. He said, "Oh, yeah, Mogul." I knew about Mogul. I said, "Was that where they were testing to see, or they were checking to see if the Soviets are testing nuclear weapons?" "Yeah," he said. "Those balloon flights, said they lifted off from Turkey and Afghanistan." "Oh, okay. Now that makes some sense. That's where you launch balloons if you want to find out what the Soviet Union's doing, from New Mexico." And then, of course, when that didn't fly very well because they didn't have anything to back it up particularly, now we've got the crash dummies with the documents and the photographs and the films from 1957, 1961, Colonel Haynes, I don't really know what they saw in 1947. That's the truth. So, but if you want to, and if your mindset is such, you can believe the government that has 4 different pronouncements backed by little or nothing that basically says nothing unusual happened in Roswell. On the other hand, what do we have over here? We've got about 400 individuals that are now on the public record, including retired military officers, ranking officers, people who were children at the time, people who are still alive. The funeral home director, Glenn Dennis, who I've met personally and seems to be a very fine person, okay? And they all say, hey, it was a disc and there were small little alien bodies. It's mindset. Which one are you going to choose? Which one do you want to believe? By the way, if I can find it, which I probably can't because every time I look around, it's just, there's something else. Yeah. Y'all probably hadn't heard this story, so I'll just share this one with you. This came out in Fort Worth Star-Telegram right after the little hoopla in Roswell. You can make it 402 now, okay? This is out of Weatherford, Texas, which is a little bitty town to the west of Fort Worth. Edward and Helen Farkas would like to set straight all the cynics who believe that reports of aliens crashing near Roswell, New Mexico are hooey. The Weatherford couple lived in the New Mexico desert where some say a UFO crashed 50 years ago. Both say they had separate close encounters with the supposed spacecraft in July 1947. I was fixing dinner and my sink happened to be under the window in the house and I saw a thing go sailing past, said Helen Farkas, now 75, who was at home that day with the couple's 2-year-old daughter. It was going at a pace that no weather balloon ever went. It was just like a jet engine was stuck on it. That thing was going so fast, honest to Pete. It was shiny. It was bright as all get out. It just went so fast. When I lifted my head up and saw it, I said, what the heck is that? I guess I should have gone outside, but I was right in the middle of cooking. It's little, as an old newspaper reporter, it's little touches like that tell me, this woman's on the level. Because if you're making stuff up, you're going to be saying, I saw it and I rushed outside and I had this really nice. No. She should have gone outside, but she had to do the cooking. Helen Farkas said she didn't dare share her sighting with neighbors or friends because she did not want to jeopardize the security clearance of her husband, then an Army Air Corps Master Sergeant stationed at Roswell. She said she was champing at the bit by the time he got home that night. When Ed came in, I said, you won't believe what I saw, she recalled. But the Master Sergeant, now 81, had his own strange tale to tell. Edward Farkas, who was with the 509th Bomb Wing, 715th Bomb Squadron, said he saw a strange convoy of 4 or 5 trucks and a couple of Jeeps at the base that day. Word on the base was the trucks were supporting what was left of a spacecraft. I saw the vehicles, the trucks, the GI trucks covered, bringing in this debris from what we heard was the crash of a flying saucer that crashed northwest of Roswell, he said. I was right there near the flight line. They were under heavy guard. They had a lot of security. They took that stuff and they took it in a big hangar, and they had security around so we couldn't see what it was. In the half-century that's passed, aliens have not played a big role in the lives of the Farkases, Connecticut natives who will celebrate their 57th wedding anniversary August the 12th. Edward Farkas retired from the military in 1965 and worked as a flight planner at General Dynamics until 1974. Helen Farkas went on to work as a voluntary nurse, real estate agent, and homemaker. But they aren't reticent when they hear people make light of an event that they still remember clearly. I don't talk much about that thing too much, honey, unless I get provoked and someone says it isn't so, Edward Farkas said, because it's an incident that's been covered up. There's too much lying going on. Here's just 2 more. And see, you've never heard about the Farkases, and they just cropped up. Now, is that all part of some big elaborate disinformation program? I don't think so. What we have here are people, hundreds of people, who have tried honestly to say what they know about this most intriguing incident. But again, it's mindset. You can always say, oh, they just want to get their name in the paper. And there are those who would do that. So we got mindset. An alien agenda, we find out that we've got mindset all the way down the line. Y'all, many of you probably heard Lloyd Pye speak. Most of what we think about our history, our human history, is simply not true. I was onto this years ago before all of this evidence came up showing that the water weathering on the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid indicates that they were probably built prior to 10,000 years ago, which, throws our particular official history into a cocked hat. But I was onto it kind of a different thing. I was brought up in the Southern Baptist Church, and I was, schooled and instilled with all those Bible stories. And when I began to think about the Great Pyramid, I thought, well, now, we're told that who built the Great Pyramid? Anybody? Come on, who built the Great Pyramid? Khufu, the Egyptians. Okay, but now wait a minute. The Egyptians didn't get out there and really drag those rocks around, right? Who really built it? Slaves. The slaves of the Egyptians. Okay, now we're just using our deductive reasoning here. So the slaves of the Egyptians built the pyramids, and we've all seen the little reconstructions and the drawings and the Disney paintings and stuff where you got thousands and thousands of these slaves, and they're dragging those rocks, man. And they didn't even have wheels; they had their own little roller things, I'd hate to be the guy that had to keep grabbing the back log and running up to the front. They drag those things to the desert, over a period of hundreds of years to build these huge, big pyramids. Yes, over sand, right. Thank you. I have trouble walking on the beach. Grease-coated logs skidding over the sand. Okay. Question. Who were the slaves of the Egyptians? The Israelites. Okay. It's right there in the Bible. Who is one of the most well-documented peoples on the history of the world? The Israelites. Now, I defy you to go back anywhere in the Bible or in the Gnostic Gospels or the Essene Library or the library at Nag Hammadi. I defy you to go back to any of those ancient texts and find a little passage that says, oh, by the way, Uncle Herbie dragged rocks through the desert for the Egyptians for about 100 years before he died of exertion. It's not there. It's not there. It didn't happen. Okay? It didn't happen. But we're expected to believe all this. So that's all covered in Alien Agenda. It's also the ancient astronauts. One thing that, I was aware of a lot of the stories. I was aware of Zachariah Sitchin. I read his stuff, I don't know, whenever it came out, 15 years ago or so. I thought, this is really interesting stuff, but how do we really know if any of this really happened, Well, as we're finding out more and more and more and more, we're finding out that there's a lot to support it. There's a lot to support it. So I was aware of the whole idea that maybe in man's distant past that there were things flying around. What I was not prepared for when I researched Alien Agenda was the fact that these stories of ancient gods flying in flying machines who would come down to earth, who would teach skills and languages, these are stories that permeate every culture from every corner of this planet. The Chinese have these stories. The Indians, the Vedas tell these stories. The Middle East has these stories. In India, they have these stories. South America, Central America. It's all there, okay? It's all there. We really need to revise our knowledge of where we came from. For those of you who've all dug into that, no pun intended, we realize that, okay, maybe we're a hybrid race, and we were created to mine gold for these aliens. That's kind of the bottom line of that whole story, isn't it? Okay? So what? So what? I don't notice any of you mining gold today. Okay? So it's ancient history. That would be like telling a very successful black man today that, well, your ancestors were dragged over here in slaves and in chains. Well, that's true. But does that have any real impact on that man today who has a college degree and has a very nice job and is raising a very fine family? No. So it's nothing to be fearful of. In fact, I find it quite ironic that at this very point in history, when we as a nation are beginning to deal with the moral and ethical questions concerning DNA manipulation and cloning, that we're finding out that that may be where we came from. Isn't that interesting? And, of course, then I'll just bring it all the way up to the book. And you all know most of this stuff, so I won't bore you with all the little stories. But there's so many things that you may not know about. The Mantell death. I mean, we all know that he left a flight of P-51s alone, went chasing after this UFO that he plainly describes and said he saw, and it was growing bigger, which to me leaves out the idea that he was chasing Venus. He's chasing Venus. It may still be there, but it ain't going to grow bigger. And I think it's pretty well established today and pretty well accepted that he died of lack of oxygen. His plane did not have oxygen equipment. And once he got up almost to 30,000 feet, once you're past 15,000 feet, you got an oxygen problem. Okay, so he may have passed out from lack of oxygen, and he crashed. And that's where the debunkers would just leave it. Okay, so see, there was no UFO. Of course, that begs the question of why did he go significantly above his oxygen line, unless he was really excited about chasing something. And they leave that off. What they also leave off, and which I describe in Alien Agenda, is the crash itself. If a plane, a P-51 with the engine in the nose, which would make it come down nose first, falls from 30,000 feet and buries into the ground, it's going to create one heck of a hole. And that engine, they're probably going to have to get some bulldozers out to do a little digging work before they can even pull the engine out of the ground. It'd probably be 8 foot down into the ground, okay? This was not the case. This was not the case. According to several accounts, including a retired investigator now who lives in England and who was one of the investigators on the Mantell crash, the plane belly flopped into a clearing, just kind of bam, with just enough force to kind of break the wings off. So what happened to Mantell? According to one of the witnesses there, he died because when the plane struck, the control wheel crushed his chest. That's what killed him. In other words, except for that, except for this landing, and except for the fact that maybe his harness was too loose or these controls were right there in front of him, he would have survived. And he wouldn't have become the first pilot that was thought to have been killed by a UFO. And how come we don't know that? Because the man who was the investigator said that when the official report came out and he saw his name on it, he realized he had not signed that report. It was a forgery. So the cover-up is now probably almost a bigger story than what's going on, because now we know that UFOs and these phenomena, this has been going on for millennia. Okay, there's nothing new about it. And this is good news, because if there were folks up there who wanted to come and invade us and blow up our cities like a la Independence Day, they certainly would have done it before now, right? Why did they do it in 1947 when all they had to do was face propeller-driven airplanes? They're certainly not going to wait till we got deep space platforms and laser technology, nuclear weapons, for God's sakes. So I think that the people who try to scare everybody and say, "Ooh, they're here and they're grabbing us," and we need to rethink that, and we need to think long and hard about that, and we need to take a somewhat balanced viewpoint of the whole thing. So let's talk a minute about the secrecy. Why all this secrecy? Well, it's multi-layered. And I'll just start and go down the list. First and foremost is, how do you back off a lie once you've told it? How can anybody within the government and the military step forward now and say, well, okay, we lied to you for 50 years? They just can't do that. And as most of you have probably found out in your personal experiences, when you tell one lie, you end up having to tell another lie to cover the first one. And then you got to tell a few more lies to cover those. Pretty soon you got such a hodgepodge and a house of cards built up that all it takes is for one of those lies to come unravel and the whole thing collapses, right? I certainly found that out early on, and that's why I've found out that the best thing is just don't tell lies. Sometimes you have to shuffle around, If your wife brings home this god-awful looking hat and says, "How do you like my new hat?" You know better than to tell the absolute truth. But there are ways of doing it. You can say, "That's certainly you." Or isn't that interesting? Or something, okay? But you can get along without lying, but the God has lied to us. They've lied to us on any number of things. And now it's to the point that, and it's really sad, because I can remember the time, as most of you can, when we all had unbounded faith and confidence in government. Oh, yeah, there may be a few bad apples, but the system works. Well, the system's screwed up, okay? And it's not because of the system. The system we have in this country is the best system ever devised in the history of the world. And I'm talking about the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, the checks and balances. Yes, thank you. So I don't want anybody to misconstrue what I'm saying, that I'm against the system. The system's beautiful. The problem is we're not using the system. And we're not going by the system. Right? Almost every problem that we've got in this country, if you track it back, you'll find it's because we are not adhering to the Constitution of the United States. For example, the Constitution of the United States clearly says that only Congress shall have the power to declare war. Well, boy, that sounds pretty flaky on the face of it, because those clowns can't even agree on when to adjourn, Until you begin to think about it. Then you begin to think about it, and you go, wait a minute. All those guys up there, looking for that pork and doing all their little politicking and their glad-handing and stuff. If you can convince 3/4 of them that we need to go to war, we probably need to go to war. And if you cannot convince 3/4 of them that we need to go to war, we do not need to be getting into a war. See, that could have saved us a lot of problems. For those of you who are Vietnam-era people like me, you'll realize that the whole thing went wrong in the summer of 1964, long after Kennedy was assassinated. And they had the phony Gulf of Tonkin incident, which now has been shown to be totally bogus, okay? I could explain that whole thing to you, but that's another talk. The point is that Lyndon Johnson used that to great effect to get rammed through Congress the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which allowed him to abrogate the Constitution of the United States, and for him, without a formal declaration of war, to have war powers within himself. And within months, there were ground combat troops in Vietnam, and that's what started us on that war, which wrecked our economy and cost us 58,000 American lives. We went against the Constitution. I might also point out the Constitution says only Congress shall have the power to coin and regulate money. But we've given that up. We gave that up in 1913 when we created the Federal Reserve System, which, contrary to a lot of popular belief, has no direct connection to the government. These are 12 regional banks that are owned by other banks that are owned by private bankers. And you might think back to what Thomas Jefferson wrote. If we ever allow bankers to gain control over our money supply, our ancestors will wake up without property in the country we founded. Think about that, folks. Isn't that about right? Think all these young folks that are living in apartments and condominiums, and they owe on their credit cards, they owe on their TV, they owe on their car. About all they really own is a few of those clothes in their closet. It's about all they own. They wake up without property in the country that their ancestors founded, if we allow bankers to gain control over our money supply. This is what happens when you go against the Constitution. But I tend to be getting on my soapbox. But it's very pertinent, because I cover this in Alien Agenda in an addendum called Take Me to Your Leader. Remember the old thing? Well, the guy gets out and he says, take me to your leader. Who is our leader? Is Bill Clinton our leader? I don't think so. Is Boris Yeltsin our leader? No. Another thing, folks, I don't think we're going to have open contact with extraterrestrial intelligences until, number one, we develop a little intelligence of ourselves, of our own, and two, that we have somebody who speaks for Earth. We don't have anybody who speaks for Earth. We don't. So then you have to ask yourself, well, and here's the big question, because now there's a controversy brewing within the UFO community over whether or not to support government initiatives for more openness and freedom of UFO information. And I got to jump back on the soapbox and make one more little editorial comment here. Please don't let this split the community. It's already split enough, okay? There's room for everything, because now on the one hand, you got people who are saying we need to push this government initiative. We need to look for the government and pressure them to tell us the truth, okay? And then you got people on the other hand that say, hey, forget the government. You know, they've already proven to us that they cannot be trusted. They cannot be looked upon or relied upon to tell us the truth about all this. So just forget them, and we'll take care of it ourselves, okay? And I see people falling out over this issue. It's a non-issue. We can do both. We can do both. Keep pressuring the government. Who knows? You might accidentally kick in the door someday. All right? But at the same time, don't rely on that. Do your own research. Continue to hold meetings. Continue to seek the truth for yourself. Don't let this be an issue. We can do both. Okay? Now, that's government openness and secrecy. But it gets down to, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but Webb Hubbell, a close personal friend of Bill Clinton, now has a book out, which is largely self-serving and blah, 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 blah. But in there is a very, very, very intriguing point. He says that his friend Bill Clinton, about 1992, and this is true, appointed him an associate deputy director of the Justice Department of Justice. And in his book, he said Bill Clinton told him, Webb, I'm sending you over there with two objectives in mind. He said, I want to know who killed JFK, and I want to know if there are UFOs. Hey, same questions we have. Bill Clinton wants to know. And Hubbell said he did not feel like he was able to get access to any of the information, and that he was not very successful in trying to answer either of those two questions. Now, let me add to that. Here recently, we've got Dr. Stephen Greer, who, of course, most of you know heads the CD program. He has now gone public, and he said, I was not supposed to talk about this because it was for backgrounding only, but since Webb Hubbell has come out and made the announcement that he has, I would like to share this with you. He says in 1993, he spent 3 hours with the then CIA director, Jim Woolsey, and briefed him on the UFO situation. He said Woolsey put his head in his hands and said, oh, my God. He said Woolsey went back and tried to get to the documents that would address the issues that Greer had brought up to him, and he could not get to them. Now, folks, regardless of your opinion on UFOs, regardless of your opinion on the Kennedy assassination, regardless of your opinion on much of anything, this is a serious issue. And this is something that we all ought to be aware of and all ought to be very, very concerned about. If the President of the United States and the head of the Central Intelligence Agency cannot get to UFO information, who in the hell's in charge? We've got to determine this before we'll ever make any headway on trying to find out what's going on. Now, that's on the political end of it. On the other hand, we have our own selves. We do have control over our lives. Obviously, we can't control what the CIA does. I thought it was pretty funny. Somebody sent me a 1991 internal report from the CIA on greater openness within the CIA. This was the result, of course, of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of communism. And a lot of people are saying, what do we need them for? And actually, we don't. Okay? I think one of the greatest PR moves this country could make would be to announce to the world that since the Cold War is over with, we are disbanding the CIA. We don't need it. And that's not from some sort of liberal dove, lay down your arms type mentality. The NSA is much bigger and does better job. Okay? We wouldn't be sacrificing anything in national security, but we'd have a public relations coup next to none. The CIA has caused us more problem than it's done any good. But that is on that level. I was going to tell you the report on greater CIA openness. So this is an internal report. Right on the front page it says the CIA contacted a wide number of individuals within academia, the media, the military, government, for their input on greater CIA openness. For instance, see Appendix B. Well, you go to Appendix B, top page, it said the following individuals were contacted for their views on greater CIA openness. The rest of the page is blacked out. So much for greater CIA openness. So we're back to ourselves. We're the ones that are going to have to take care of our own mindset, and we're the ones that's going to have to take it upon ourselves to educate others and try to further this whole thing. Now, there's been a lot of talk at this conference about the abduction phenomenon. I don't like the word abduction. I think that's a negative connotation. I think you start off, when you start talking about an abduction, you're starting off from the most negative standpoint. And I've heard that expressed by some of the other speakers, and I have to agree. I think what we can all agree on is that we really don't understand what this experience is. But consider this. You're driving along in your car. The next thing you know, there's missing time. You don't know what's happened. And when you open your eyes, you're in this dull and sterile-looking environment, and there's these green figures holding over you with great big eyes, and they're poking you, and something hurt, and you're moving down there, and they're doing things to you, and you didn't ask for this, and it's a terrifying experience. Have you had an alien abduction? No, you've had a car wreck and you're in the emergency room and they're trying to save your life. Mindset. It's mindset, okay? And I don't want to get in a big squabble or a big controversy because we're all in this and we all need to be working together. But I just have to mention that there are some people working in this area who I think, because of the experiences that they've had and the people they have come into contact with, take a very negative view of what's going on. I mean, I'll be the first to admit, if I was taken against my will out of my home by anybody, whether it's little green men or the sheriff's deputies, I don't care who it is, I would be very upset and very angry, and I would feel like that I had definitely been violated in some way. So I'm not trying to say that everything's sweetness and light, but I'm saying that, is to the best of my knowledge and my research, I don't know of any demonstrable, provable, documented instance where somebody's been killed or their leg's been lopped off or whatever, okay? So whatever's going on, it is not fatally intrusive. And I really think we don't quite understand what's going on. But I do know this, in researching what I will call the contactee. Let's go back to contactee. That's a more neutral term. Going back to the contactee experience, I discovered this. The stories that we're so familiar with are the ones coming from people who indeed have had a traumatic or negative experience. And they come back and they seek professional help. They go to people like Bud Hopkins. They go to Dr. John Mack because they want to know what happened to them. They go on the talk shows. And they go to these encounter groups and stuff because they want to know what's happened. But, folks, that's only a small piece of the puzzle. As I began to research, I came into contact with more and more people, and am still doing so, who say basically, well, I've had those type of experiences, but I didn't find them that traumatic. I thought it was kind of neat. I went along with it. I even agreed to work with them. And I'm finding these people more and more and more. Well, these people aren't traumatized. These people don't go seek the professional help. And they sure don't go on the talk shows or really much talk about their experiences because they don't want the ridicule. Okay? Now, you add that in with the negative, and man, that contactee abduction experience is much wider than we even thought. Plus, we are now finding, and of course this has been coming out through the research, that through hypnotherapy, there's a lot of people who have had these experiences and that don't even consciously remember them at this time. And this could be a bunch of you sitting right out there. You may very well, if you're fascinated by this subject and you think that, I remember one time there was a light or something, and, something like that, you very well could have had one of these experiences yourself. But we don't truly understand what it's all about. But we're learning. By the way, I also want to share with you this. Unfortunately, I can't give you copies of this because I agreed that I wouldn't. Okay, but I did not agree I wouldn't share the information. This comes, it's my understanding, this is from a think tank that was on contract by the federal government and that was providing the government with their views on what's going on. And in fact, the subject matter, it states, Observations on Public Acclimation Program. The metered release of information to the public through various unofficial channels continues to generate much interest and increasing level of awareness, with little, if any, observable side effects, other than healthy skepticism on the part of some people. We would like to suggest continuing the present approach, as it is making information available to those who are psychologically ready for it without causing stress on those who are not ready. The present approach is also proving helpful to those who are having first-hand encounters. It is providing them with a context in which to put experiences they cannot otherwise explain or understand. Having some conception of this phenomenon is an enormous psychological relief to these people and helps them get on with their lives as best as possible. This is. Providing information which helps people to cope with will become increasingly important as the percentage of the population having these encounters continues to rise. It's more and more and more. Over time, it may be appropriate to increase the accuracy and the consistency of information in circulation. Possibly, as the public gets more comfortable with AIC sightings and crop circles, additional types of information can be released. It appears most of the research community is running 1 to 2 years or more ahead of the mainstream media. Duh. Oh, really? This gives some time frame for possible disclosures to the general public while providing advanced details to those who are ready for it now. Having a certain number of informed citizens could well prove to be an invaluable resource in the face of unpredictable future events. Indeed, history may record that it was these aware people who set aside their differences and worked together most to help humanity, their country, and their government in the changing times and challenges ahead. Who are they talking about? They're talking about you. They're talking about you. The people who are aware and the people who do know what's going on. Isn't this exciting? Man, we're all part of this. We're all part of this, and it's just steamrolling. And I think most of you would agree with me that this thing is not stagnant. It's not just puttering along. I think maybe back in the early mid-'70s, it was kind of sputtering along. No, there's a few sightings, and we're doing this and that. But look what's happening today. In my mind, and I think you'll agree with me, it's snowballing. It's snowballing. We are rushing pell-mell downhill. And we are gaining, we are growing, we are learning. And if you don't think so, take this quick, simple test. Like I said, most of the people in this audience are probably my age, somewhere around in there. Think back 20 years. 20 years. This is 98, ain't it? 78. Think back to 1978. Think about where you were. Think about who you were. Think about what your thoughts were. Think about what your concerns were. I know. Disco and, getting a date or whatever. Okay. But really, think about who you were. And I think you'll be forced to agree with me that you are no longer that person. You are no longer that person. We have all, to our varying individualistic degrees, grown, learned, Man, we're about to matriculate. We're about to graduate from high school here. It's really great. And, that's interesting that I came up with that analogy because if you'll think about it, especially those that went to college, you realize that when you get out of high school, you knew everything. Man, you knew everything. That's why I like these signs that say, hey, young people, leave home, get a job, get on your own now while you know everything. We knew everything. But then after a few years, whether in a work environment or whether in college, you begin to realize you didn't know squat. I don't know anything. And isn't it interesting how smarter your parents got? About high school, they didn't know anything. They were the dumbest louts on the world. And then after just a few short years, you go, boy, they really knew what they were talking about. Isn't it funny how they just suddenly got educated? Well, we're growing, we're learning, and it's all happening. Now, if you want to put a metaphysical bent on it and say we're moving into the fourth dimension and that's fine. That's fine. Because it's mindset. It's whatever you want to put into it. But the reality is still there. We're still growing. We're still learning. Now we come back to, we're learning. We're growing. What is the alien agenda? They are here. We all know that. What is the alien agenda? What's going on? All right. Without giving a whole lecture on remote viewing, let me just say that one of the things that gave me the courage or the fortitude to go ahead and launch out and say, here's what seems to be going on, was when I began to study the government remote viewing program. And I talked to not only the people that participated in this program, but people on oversight committees, the scientists that developed this technology. And I'm here to tell you it works, okay? It's not a panacea. You can't just close your eyes and see anything you want to see and get it crystal clear. It's not like that. But it is a methodology that, if followed correctly, can provide insight into any number of things, including UFO issues. And as far as I'm concerned, remote viewing today is very probably one of the best methods that we have now for trying to penetrate the alien agenda. What does it tell us? Well, first off, it tells us that we cannot get bogged down over, are they little grays, or are they tall Nordics, or are they reptilians, or are they whatever? The ship's round, or are they circular, or the cigar shaped? Because the answer is yes. All of the above. We have really progressed. Back in the 50s, it was, there's little green men coming here. Do they come from Mars, or do they come from Venus? Big arguments over that. Well, we progressed. We got to the point, we kind of figured, they're probably not really coming from Mars or Venus. So then there's big arguments. Do they come from Zeta Reticuli 4? Or do they come from the Pleiades? And big arguments over that. The answer is yes. They come from all of that, okay? Well, now we're a little smarter and we're a little more progressed, as I was saying. And now the big argument is, are they even space aliens? Maybe they come from another dimension. Maybe they come from another spiritual plane. Maybe they are time travelers. Big arguments over this. Hey, the answer is yes. It's a big, wide universe. And there's lots of folks out there. And this is what the military remote viewers have seen. And if you say, I don't know whether that military remote viewing really is worth anything or not, because believe me, the CIA and the military has tried to downplay it. They say, we dabble around in that, but we didn't really get anything much out of it. Bourgeois. They got a lot out of it, and the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the fact that they continued to fund this program for a quarter of a century through 4 separate administrations. Somebody felt like they were getting something out of it, and they were. And this is when they begin to do it. They were never ordered or even urged to look at ET and UFO issues. In fact, they were discouraged because their superiors didn't want to hear anything about that. So how did they get into it? Well, it was real simple. They would be tasked to go up mentally and look at things flying through the upper atmosphere to find out what our enemies were testing, what the Soviets were doing, what the Chinese were doing. And they'd take a look up there, and they'd see these things flitting through the atmosphere. And they'd take a close mental look, and it didn't take them long to say, whoa, that's not the Soviets. That's not even our guys. As one of them put it, those guys aren't even from the neighborhood. This is something else that I don't want you to lose sight of. A very important fact here. Every single person who participated in the military remote viewing programs had direct personal knowledge of the UFOs. This is why they're downplaying it. This is the limited hangout. This is why they suppressed my book on remote viewing in 1995. I was talking about UFOs and remote viewing at the same breath, and they want to separate it. They don't mind admitting that they were dabbling around with psychic phenomena, but they do not want you to know that every single one of those people had direct knowledge of the UFOs. They saw where they were coming from. They saw where they're going to. According to several of the remote viewing studies, there are huge, huge ships that we've never even seen parked on the dark side of Jupiter, Saturn, way on out there. There's people all over this system, okay? What we see, the huge big ships, okay, that's just the ones that kind of get them here to the Earth. What we mostly see are the little round saucer deals and all like that. These are scout ships. These are just... this is something that's bothered the researchers for years, Well, if these are ships and they come from another planet, where's the bathrooms? Where's the galley? How they eat? Well, they don't have to. They're never in these things probably more than an hour or two at a time. Okay? There's little scout ships. And then you got little balls of light. These are like little TV cameras that fly around and look at things and stuff. This is technology that's far beyond us. Okay? But to me, it's not harmful, because if it was harmful, we'd already be harmed. All right? Now, again, back to the secrecy. So, first off, the government's got to keep all this secret. And why? First off, they can't admit that they've lied to us for 50 years. Second off, most superficial explanation is that they view UFOs as advanced technology. And in the military and intelligence minds, advanced technology represents potential weaponry. We've got to keep that secret at all cost, But then it goes a little bit deeper. Would you all continue to pay ever-increasing prices for gasoline, petroleum products that in the back of your mind are damaging, wrecking the environment, polluting the atmosphere, if you truly knew that there were alternative energy sources out there? Oh, we hear talk of this and that, electric cars maybe, and Tesla equipment, and da-da-da-da-da-da, but it all sounds just, you can't go down the store and buy one, okay? Well, you could if it wasn't for the energy monopolies. And the energy monopolies are owned by the giant multinational corporations who control the wealth of this country. We all know that in the United States today, about 2% of the population controls the vast majority of the resources. We know this. This is said. This is acknowledged publicly. We just don't like to dwell on it, and we don't like to really think about it because it flies in the face of what we were taught in grade school about freedom and democracy and participatory government and all like that. All right? Well, who are these 2%? We need to identify them. Okay? Well, for one thing, they're the 2% of the families in this country that have all the wealth. And these families, if you look at that, the whole family doesn't make decisions. In these families, there's a few patriarchs or matriarchs too, okay? And they are the ones who run these families. So now we're down maybe to just a couple thousand people. A couple thousand people, that's like a little small town. That'd be like the size of a town about the size of Eureka Springs. I think I saw coming in and said, 1900, 1600, something like that. That's it. It's about the size of a little town like this. And I don't know how many of y'all live in a little town, but surely you've had enough experience to know that in a little town of about 2,000 people, there's a pecking order. Okay? And it's just there. It may be the oldest family that's been there, fought the Indians and carved out that little piece of land. Or it may be the richest guy in town. Or it may be just the most prominent guy, the mayor or the funeral director, whatever. But there's a pecking order, and it goes from the top. And in this pecking order, you don't necessarily always have to give orders to the people at the bottom. They just take their cues. They know what the big guys want, and they just fall in line because they want to curry favor, and they want to be in line. So it may be when this patriarch dies away, they'll get to be the patriarch. Okay? It's just the way it works. It's human politics, the human condition. Now, we all understand this, okay? We were all indoctrinated with this at an early age when we watched the old grade B Western movies. It was always the kindly old banker who was behind the rustlers who were running the homesteaders off their land so he could get it and sell it to the railroad at great profit. We all know it. We all know this. Why can't we apply it to what's going on today? It's the same thing. The human nature doesn't change, only technology. All right? These folks don't want you to know that there's anything other than the here and the now. Because if you understand that, maybe you wouldn't buy their latest product. Maybe you wouldn't go buy that electric toothbrush. Okay? Or all these other little gem cracks that we're sold on a continuing basis. And you know, this is a problem too. I don't know if you've thought about this, but we are really caught between a rock and a hard place. We are the most consuming society to ever hit the face of the world. We all know we are a consumer society, but we are the most consuming society right here in the United States of America to ever come along. And it's going to kill us. For one thing, they determined years ago that the rest of the world, in Europe and in Japan and Asia, the world's resources will not support a lifestyle for them that's like the lifestyle that we know. Okay? So what are they going to do about that? Well, for the last 20 years, they've been downsizing our lifestyle. And it's worked. And if you think about it, today you have more money in your pocket than you had 20 years ago, but you can't buy as much. It's not worth as much. Okay? Today, how many households have the wife staying home taking care of the house while the man goes and earns some money? Doesn't happen anymore. That's a fairy tale. Everybody's working today. Everybody's working today. Even if you're on retirement, you're finding a way to make some pocket money because that retirement is not carrying you. Okay? So we're a consuming society. Now, if we continue to consume at current and increased rates, what's going to happen? We're going to smother ourselves in waste, pollution, garbage. We're just going to be down the tubes. Well, what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is that we wake up one morning and we say, well, I'm not going to consume like I've been consuming. I'm not going to buy that new house. I'm not going to buy that new car. Well, then what happens? The economy collapses because we're not consuming. We are caught between the rock and a hard place, and we better start thinking about new ways of dealing with things, okay? And again, it's back to us. Again, it's back to us. But now, do we look at this with fear? I don't think so. I look at it with wide open, walled-eyed excitement. Isn't this exciting? Look at the time we're in. We've got an opportunity now to just remake everything. All right? And you don't have to get out and riot in the streets. If this was the Middle Ages and the king's troops were coming around and taking half your year's wages, okay, you had two alternatives. You knew exactly where that suppression and that power was coming from, and you had two choices. You could either put up with it or you could mount a revolution. We don't have to do that. Of course, y'all realize that you're working half a year for the government. 6 months of the effort you put in out of a year goes in taxes. Hidden taxes, sub-taxes, taxes on the taxes. You know, you're supporting the government for half the year. We know where the pressure's coming from. But we've got other choices. We don't have to start a revolution and get people hurt, okay? And we don't have to just sit back and put up with it. Because the irony is that we are paying these people to do this to us. So, what do? We don't pay them. Make them get a real job. So, let's operate from a standpoint of love. And I say love, I'm not exactly the guy to be talking about love, you know, but it does seem to be that there are only two basic emotions in the universe: fear and love. From fear stems everything negative. Because if you fear something, pretty soon you hate it. If you hate it, you fight it. If you fight it, you'll do violence. And then you got death and destruction that comes from fear. If you love something, and all of you have loved somebody at some point, whether it's a sibling, an offspring or a wife or a husband or whatever, and if you truly love somebody, even when they screw up, even when they do you dirty, you still love them and you take it in consideration, okay? And from love stems compassion, consideration, compromise, everything that we think of as being good. So now, as we go through these exciting times, we have a choice. We can either view it from a standpoint of fear, and that's easy to do because we're dealing with a lot of things that we really just don't know what it is. And that's what stimulates fear. Talk to any combat veteran, and they'll tell you that once the guns go off and once the battle starts, you don't have time to be fearful. You're too busy trying to save your butt or win the victory. Okay? The fear comes before the battle and after the battle, when you have a chance to think, oh my God, what could have happened to me? Or better yet, before the battle, when you don't know what's going to be happening. And that's kind of where we are now. We're before the battle. We know things are going on, but we're not sure what they are, and therefore we're not sure what to do about it, and therefore this unsuredness leads to fear. Hey, no fear, okay? It's just like the kids. Look at these kids running around on their skateboard, and they flip up in the air and come down on that little piece of board with little bitty wheels on it, and I just cringe because I realize that at my age, and if I'd try that, I'd break every bone in my body, you know. And what they got on their T-shirt? No fear. No fear. They got no fear. And like I said earlier, they're not here at these conventions because they already know. Space aliens? Sure. They grew up with it. They grew up with these concepts. We did, okay? So we're learning, but they know. No fear. And we're going to go all into this together, and we're going to progress even further, and it's going to be really exciting. And we're going to go at it from love and not fear, right? Thank you. I think we have a bit of time left. If I can answer anybody's question, I'll be glad to. Well, because I promised the person that I got the documents from that I would not give out that information, and I think he was afraid that if that became known, we know where it came from, that they may be able to track back and find out who leaked the documents. So I'm sorry. That may or may not be valid, but I made a promise, and I have to stick by it. I learned that early on. You don't find out things by burning your sources. It may have been a bad bargain, but I wanted to see the document, and I did see it. And I did tell them that I was going to share the information, which I have, and I think that's about all I could do with that. It was given to me about a year ago, but I think it dates back to several years. I think, in fact, let me see if it's got. I'm not sure if it's got a date on it or not. 1990. It goes back to 1990. Now, that's interesting, too, isn't it? Because they're talking about the continued metered release, and just think about all the stuff that's come out since 1990. Some of you people have been at it longer than me may want to argue, but it seems to me that in the last 10 years we've seen more information and more acceptance of these concepts permeate our society than ever before. All right, we all must be hungry. Let's break for lunch.